This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Today's episode, folks, I'm intrigued with this. My guest today was recommended to me by a very dear friend, a guy that I've known for a long time, Dolan White. Dolan and I do a fair amount of work together. And Dolan was pretty adamant about me getting Andrew on the show. And I was curious about the adamancy, kind of what's going on. He said there's so much synergy, but that is potentially there. If you have an opportunity to speak to him, because the philosophical he comes from is very similar to what mine is from a leadership perspective. And I'm going to be very interested to kind of unbundle a couple of things here. Andrew Oxley is my guest. He's the founder and CEO of the Oxley Group, which is an executive and leadership coaching practice that's focused on developing, retaining high-performing employees with the intent of delivering exceptional performance. Now, you can kind of look at that and go, well, that's kind of a generic description. But when you start parsing it out, it gets to be interesting, because that's where the activity of leadership gets to be a real interesting piece of how all of this works, because it's not a management function. It's really about leadership. And in today's world, we're seeing, at least in my experience with the clients with whom I work, leadership is becoming more and more relevant to what we're doing. And I had I've worked with John Cotter out at Harvard a number of years ago. Distinctions between leadership and management, and what hat is worn when, depending on what's going on. And he had a very interesting matrix where you start increasing volatility in the marketplace, and you start looking at the nature of the organization, the greater complexity in the organization. If you've got volatility and high complexity, you need to have leadership in play. Because management is organized around stability and predictability. And in high volatility, that doesn't work well. But if that's the domain that you're familiar with, you're going to be dead in the water pretty quickly. So leadership is about causing movement. And in highly volatile environments where change is going on all the time, how do you actually lead that? And it's really about marking out possibility so that people can organize around it, transferring it over to management so it can turn possibility into probability, and then you take a run at it and see what kind of results you get produced. So with that kind of a segue, that kind of an opening monologue here, I want to welcome Andrew Oxley to the show. Andrew, it's great to have you here. There we go. Okay.
All right, you're back.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, we had a little glitch in the matrix there. That's fine. So I'm just welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be here, Blaine.
Good. In that description around volatility and complexity, where would you land on that conversation? Just kind of what's your sense of what's going on today and what's needed today?
Yeah, when I first started doing this type of work, I had we had a balance. We talked about management skills. We talked about leadership skills.
Yeah.
In general, people don't talk about management as much anymore, and I think that's in some ways it's a shame, because management is still important, but management is typically more about process and things. And leadership is about taking people or an organization on a journey. And one of the things we often say to people is, if a journey is not involved, a leader is not required. And so when we talk about a journey, it's either taking individuals to somewhere they have not gone before, or I'm going to somewhere I haven't gone before, or the organization's going, or, but it's all about a journey. And so in order to go on a journey, you need three things. You got to know where you are, you got to know where you're going, and you have to have a plan. And I think the challenge so often is that we actually default into management mode and we just start planning. And if the people don't agree where we're starting from and they don't necessarily have a passion for where we're going, well, then the plan is somewhat irrelevant because they don't even agree on the endpoints of the journey.
Yeah.
So that's why I love the title of your podcast. I think it goes fundamentally to one of the key aspects of leadership, which which I know we're probably going to get into as we go forward. So
Yeah. Well, I love the metaphor of a journey. About a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I was asked to facilitate a board retreat for two organizations that were coming together, and they were creating a new organization out of this. And so I actually used the metaphor of a journey. We're on a journey here together. And to your point, here's where we're, starting from. Can we get some consensus around that? And we're going to spend some time today doing that. And here's where we're going. We're going to get some agreement about the value of that, if that's an ideal that you think is going to be worthy. But in between those 2 points, when you start packing for a trip, what do you pack? And most people will pack what they're familiar with, and they overpack. I know I speak from my own experience with this. I overpack all the time. And if I'm traveling with my wife, she really overpacks. And it can slow us down. And it can be, all of a sudden we're burdened with things we don't need any longer. And I think that's where leadership comes into play here, is because it's you can actually start pruning, what's actually required for this journey. But that's also the difficulty, because people have relationships with things, work process. They have relationship with history. They have relationship with, this is my chair. What do you mean I have to move someplace else? All of that stuff. In your work with your clients, how do you actually set people up to appreciate, number one, and then actually number two, deal with the relational dynamic that people are struggling with when change gets introduced? And I'm not talking the interpersonal relations. It's the disruption to existing relationships that they have around ideas, around that thing over there that we're moving toward. I don't know anything about it, so I don't have a relationship with it yet. Yeah, all of that stuff. Yeah, because you've worked with some very interesting companies, and have done some very successful projects, with those firms. I've got to guess that there's some relational dynamics that have gotten addressed in this.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that that if you think about the endpoints of the journey, and I want to talk about where we're going first, the direction we're headed towards, and the immediate question I ask leaders is, why should your people care? Like why? Like why does it matter to them? And they're like, well, because that's the goal. I'm like, but that really doesn't answer the question of why they should care, right? And so when you think about what's that?
Because I told him to.
Yeah, because I told them, which was never a great answer when we were kids. It's certainly not a great answer when we're adults. So they say, well, my people are excited about where we're going. And I go, really? Well, let me wander around for a little bit and talk to them. And I do. And they're like, first of all, they typically don't even know where they're going. And secondly, they're not particularly passionate about it, even if they know. And so the question becomes, why should they care? Like, why should they care? What is and your podcast is called The Soul of Business. So purpose has to be external from yourself. It's not about what you can achieve. It's what you're trying to achieve in service to others. Yeah. And so what the problem we get around is, I got to figure out what the purpose of my life is. And we define it as something I need to do, when it's really what I need to do is a means to an end. So what's the end? What's the end that the business is trying to achieve? Now, whether you're a $20 million organization or a $2 billion organization or a $200 billion organization, if you structure the goals for your organization around the purpose of your organization around goals and what you want to achieve, eventually you're going to achieve the goals. And people will say, so what's next? And they're like, well, we're going to set bigger goals. Yeah. You're like, well, okay, so when are we done? And so there's a lack of excitement and passion. I believe that passion is the missing ingredient for most organizations.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to have a passion for what you're trying to achieve. And while the owner of the business might be able to get passionate about a number, the employees aren't that passionate about a number. They're passionate about something else.
Yeah.
You talked about the difference between leadership and management and how things have changed. In this accelerated, we packed about 20 years of change into 6 months during COVID. It was already happening before COVID. It's been happening for a long time. Blaine, you've been teaching leadership for a long time. You know this. People want to work for a company that is doing something significant, that is doing something meaningful. And but young people today and other generations now, it's a domino effect up through the generations. They won't put up with, what they used to put up with, or what you and I maybe put up with when we first got started.
Yeah.
They want to know they'll work harder for meaning than they will a paycheck.
Yes, they will. Absolutely. And what's interesting, and you mentioned this, the workforce today. The workforce today is comprised of, I think, last time I saw this, there was a report came across, I think it was Edelman, an Edelman survey. There's 6 generations in the workforce today. 6 generations. That has never happened before. And if I'm leading an organization and I've got to deal with 6 different generational mindsets, because I know my granddaughters and my grandson, and they're in the early 20s, just coming in their 20s. What they're paying attention to, I gotta go, are you seriously? Really?
Yeah.
And I know they're serious. I know it is really, but how do I manage that? How do I, number one, manage that? But from the relationship with meaning, people have relationship with meaning. And this is where I think the rubber meets the road from a leadership perspective. How do I, as a leader, communicate effectively that destination in a way that I can actually access 6 different generations? Because one size will not fit all in the messaging.
Yeah, it won't. And, a lot of leaders are very proud of the fact that they're no different depending on who they're trying to lead. And I'm like, well, that you shouldn't really be proud of that. Flexibility, one of the things I firmly believe is that the element with the most flexibility has the most control. My ability to flex and be different with different people. Now, the interesting thing, and this is how you can study leadership for 30, 40, 50 years and sort of feel like at the end of it that you actually know maybe a little less than you did when you started, even though you know a lot more, because you realize how much there is to understand, because human beings are complex. And if you do a little circle and you put 2 people in the circle, like one on each side, that's one line of communication. When you add one person, you have 3 lines of communication. When you add 4, now it goes up geometrically. If you ever want to draw this out, it's just like you get up to about 20 people, you got lines everywhere, and you wonder why things get complicated in organizations, right? So what we need to do when we're communicating with people, and this is so hard for many leaders because they want things to be efficient. And when you're dealing with human beings, you have to focus on being effective. So if I could just talk to the person and have one of the skill processes we teach is identifying motivators. And the problem with identifying what motivates another person, like a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old or 40-year-old, is that when you ask them, they actually don't know.
Spot on.
They're like, well, money or time off. And like, well, that's true. It's not really a complete answer. And so when I ask leaders, well, what motivates you? And they're like, well, money and time. So you don't even know what motivates you. So you have to actually peel the onion with some good information, because when you lay some different models out in front of people, they can say, well, that's what motivates me over there. But they wouldn't necessarily be able to insert that information into the conversation all by themselves.
That question about motivation, because motivation, to your point here, typically when you ask people what motivates them, they begin to look outside of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
What's the carrot or what's the stick? What am I going to be moving towards or away from? Which is different than inspiration.
Correct.
Inspiration is sourced internally. What inspires me?
Yes.
In the work that you do with your clients, and I'll speak to this from my perspective as well here. How do you wean, if in fact you do, how do you wean a leader from focusing on, I got to motivate him, into a conversation or an exploration about how do I inspire?
Yeah.
How do I inspire?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we always say is higher level skill requires higher level ethics. And so information like we're talking about today can be used to manipulate or motivate. And the difference is just intent. If I
Mm-hmm.
want you to win and I want to win, then that is motivation, right? It's inspiring someone to greatness. If I really don't care if you win, I just want what I want. Well, then that's manipulation.
Yeah.
So the first thing you have to say is, look, you have to have a heart to help the person you're talking to. I have to actually be interested in what's important to them. So what we do is we actually use a model from Edward Spranger where he looked at the, you may be familiar with his work, six basic motivations, and we pulled it apart into 12 driving forces. But what ends up happening is we try to typically to motivate people through the language and the things that motivate us. Even though we may not be able to verbalize it, it creeps into our language. So, like for example, I'm very motivated by results. So if I was trying to motivate somebody and I didn't sort of necessarily, I might understand that. All my word choices, all the phrases would all be about that.
Yeah.
And I could actually be turning the person off. They're like, man, this guy is just like all about the bottom line. Doesn't he care about people? And so by understanding that people have different levers that inspire them to greatness, I'm not being disingenuous. I'm just changing the verbiage so that it resonates with their soul.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh yeah, like that's what I want to do. So we can't really motivate or inspire anyone. All we can do is create an environment where they should choose to be, or they could choose to be, but it's their choice.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a fascinating study that was done years and years and years ago. I forget the source of it, but that was looking at a correlation between clarity around values and the correlation to commitment.
Yes.
And Barry Posner, that's who it was. It was Barry Posner who actually did this study out of UCal. And organizations that were highly clear on their values, tended to have a baseline level of commitment from their employees. They could bring in somebody that was relatively low on clarity about their own personal values, but they still kind of tracked. If you actually brought somebody in that was highly clear about their values, there was a significant statistical bump in the level of commitment that was exhibited to the organization's goals and objectives. This translates to employee engagement, which is kind of the holy grail here. So it was about clarity around value structures, this is where inspiration comes into play, and that speaks to the hiring process, the onboarding process, everything that is kind of bundled into that. I remember I was doing some work with Starbucks years ago. I spent about 8 years working, consulting with them. And I had a conversation with a store manager. And this is when they were really doing a big push for store development. They were, I don't know how many stores a day they were, opening up. But it was a big deal. And I was working in their store development group. And this, store manager was just metaphorically pulling her hair out. And I said, "What's the issue that you're facing with? I need to find a barista to run this, this next shift here." I said, "Well, how hard can that be?" She said, "Well, that's not hard at all. I can train anybody how to pull a shot of coffee. But what I'm looking for is the right kind of person." And I said, "Don't you have applications?" She says, "I've got a stack of applications." And she showed me a stack of applications. She had about 74 applications. She interviewed every one of them, rejected every one of them. And she was not willing to hire until she found the right person, knowing that she could train the skill set necessary to produce the result that she wanted. But I was just struck by that. And that the diligence and not taking the easy way out to just fill a slot, knowing that it would corrupt the culture if she did that.
Yes. Yeah. And what you're describing is the biggest challenge is, because hiring has not become easier over the years, right? And a lot of businesses that we work with, you experience exactly what you're saying, is that they're looking for a skill set and a knowledge base rather than an attitude and a work ethic. And you can usually teach someone the job. Now, I don't recommend this if you're hiring a brain surgeon. But in most jobs, even if they're not perfect at the skill, you can teach the skill. But the growth mindset and the work ethic and the all that sort of stuff is what is so critical to success.
This gets frustrating. Yeah, if you're in a leadership role here, and there's so many balls in the air that you're trying to juggle. You've written a book called The 4 Faces of Frustration.
Yes.
Yeah, and you want to talk about that a little bit, because I think what we're exploring here is very germane to what it is that you address in the book.
Yeah. So I just by way of reference, I am not a training and development professional by trade. I'm actually an engineer. So I'm uniquely qualified for what I do today. But what it taught me was how to solve problems, how to look at things from a process standpoint. So what we're always looking for in human dynamics is a simple model that explains complex things, and people are complex, right? So no model is perfect. All systems are broken, but some are helpful, right? This is a helpful system to understand people. It doesn't explain everything, but it explains a lot. And what we say is that when the easiest way to understand someone's communication style is when they're frustrated. Now, frustration is actually a human condition that we all go through. Like, everybody gets frustrated. I mean, and if they don't, they probably need therapy, because it means they're not doing very much. Because there should always be a gap between where you are and where you want to be. Not that you're unhappy with where you are, but you should never be satisfied, because that means you're not trying to strive and be more. And passion comes from growth, right? It doesn't come from being static. So what happens? I'm digressing. But what happens as we grow older is we create this comfort zone around ourselves, and we're very comfortable. But because we're comfortable, we stop growing. And when we stop growing, we get sort of bored. And what happens with a lot of leaders is they start creating messes in their life, messes in their marriage, messes in their relationships, messes in their company. Let's start a new product line, because they're bored. And so what we want to do is we always want to be stretching outside that comfort zone, because that's where the passion is. In fact, if you think about it, the most passionate you've ever been in your life was when you were the most uncomfortable. It was the periods of growth in your life where you were growing, you were trying new things, when you were first married, when you had your first house, when your kids were young. I mean, it didn't feel that great at the time, but you look back now and you're like, that was such awesome times. Yeah. But it's frustrating. And when you're frustrated, we find that you represent yourself to others one of 4 ways. The first way is, and the first way is anger. Now, everybody gets angry from time to time. But 3 of the 4 communication styles actually transition through anger into another representation of frustration. I'll talk in a minute. 1 does not. We call them reds. They just look angry a lot. Now, in their defense, they're not. They're very passionate people about anything they care about. But it's never happening fast enough. If you're ever talking to someone, you say, when do you want this? And they say yesterday. They're probably a red. Because, of course, that's impossible. You can't give something the day before it was given to you. So reds are high urgency, high task orientation. They want to get to the top of the hill, and they want to get there fast. And it's never good enough, never fast enough. And the danger with this, if you're managing people, is, of course, that they have a consistent representation or experience of failure.
Yeah.
And after a while, they just give up and they start doing their best. And that marginal effort just goes out of the relationship, right? So now the next communication style, behavioral style that relates to reds, they move fast just like reds. But after they get angry, they actually start to become highly optimistic. And they start telling you everything's going to be fine. It's going to be good. Trust me, everything's awesome. And we represent them with the happy face. They're just yellows. They're the color of optimism. And if you've ever met a yellow, I like to say that the party never really starts till the yellows arrive. The reds think it starts when they arrive because they tell people to have fun, but it really starts when the yellows arrive.
They tell people to have fun. I like that.
Yellows, they're just like a party in a box. They just show up and there's lots of fun, lots of excitement, chaos. But they're very optimistic individuals, right? They're not really addressing the problem. They're skirting around the problem, right? Now, they're very people oriented. So they want to get to the top of the hill, but preferably with, a party and some fun, Then you stay with the people orientation. There's another style, and this is actually the biggest style in society. We call them greens. When they're frustrated, they just stop talking. Mm-hmm. They just become highly, like, the emotion all goes out. Now, the problem is that the other three communication styles, when they're frustrated, they start talking. Different ways, but they start talking. Greens don't. They stop talking, which makes the other behavioral styles believe that they're fine. Right. Everything's good. You're not talking. Everything's fine. They think they're committed. They're not committed. They're plotting your demise, actually. They have long institutional memories, and the longer the tenure an employee has with your organization, the more likely it is that they are agreeing, because they're highly loyal people. Now, they may not be good performers, or they may be good performers. That's a skill issue, but they're very loyal. So that's the green. Okay. Now, they're people-oriented, very kind, sensitive. They're tending to the wounded on the way up the hill that the reds hurt and that the yellows left behind because they forgot about them. So that's the greens. Moving back up now, we have the blues, they share a high task orientation with the reds, but they just like to, they want things to be right. I mean, there's a right way to get to the top of the hill and a wrong way. And if we get to the top of the hill the wrong way, that's not okay. Which confuses the other styles, because they're like, well, we're at the top of the hill. What's the problem? Well, we didn't do it the right way. So they got when they're frustrated, they start asking tons of questions. So what happens on a team is you usually have a mixture of styles. And that's actually a really good thing, because it creates friction on the team, but too much friction and the system grinds to a halt. Right. But if you get a bunch of reds together, there will be blood. They will argue and they will fight. Get a bunch of yellows together, they're going to have a party. Get a bunch of greens together, they're going to not offend anybody, but not much will get done. You get a bunch of blues together, they're going to argue about how it should be done. You have to have the mixture to have a high performance team, but you have to manage the friction and the tension on the team.
Perfect. Yeah. I've talked a lot with clients, as well as a number of times on this show, about friction.
Yeah.
Generates heat. Heat is a cleansing mechanism, and it also, enough heat will generate light. Yeah. So you don't want to get rid of friction. You want to be able to curate and appropriately deploy friction in the service of, or conflict is another word for friction. Yeah. Deploy it in service of this worthy ideal, this directional impetus that we've said, there's the hill. Let's move in that direction. Yeah. I like that. I mean, so the idea of frustration, an unexpected opportunity shows up. Mm-hmm. If I can recognize, somebody's frustrated. Wonderful. Let's have a conversation about this, see what's going on, and what can I tap into? What can you tap into that allows us to move forward a little bit differently than what we're stuck in right now? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the challenge you run into is that when I'm frustrated, I don't become the kinder, gentler version of myself. I become the ugly gremlin version of myself. Yep. Right. So if I'm a red and I'm frustrated, I start pushing harder.
Yep.
And I push people away. If I'm a yellow and I'm frustrated, I tend to start trying to gloss over the issue. If I'm a green, I stop talking. And if I'm a blue, I start asking tons of questions. So I become more of what I naturally am, which probably doesn't lean into the flexibility issue we were talking about earlier. Because if I'm a red and I'm leading a green, for example, and I get more assertive with the green, that just shuts them down.
Yep.
And being able to recognize, they're shutting down. It's not that I'm doing anything wrong, but it's just not appropriate in this situation.
Yeah. And I like that distinction between, appropriateness, what works as opposed to, is this right?
Yes.
Yeah. And most people would rather be right. This is the right way to communicate because that's the way I'm familiar with. No, well, is it working for you or not?
Yeah, exactly.
Different set of questions. Yeah.
Yeah, we were all taught growing up, treat other people the way we'd want to be treated, which is awesome in morality and ethics. It's horrible in leadership because if I treat people the way I want to be treated, I will connect with people just like me. and I
Yep.
will drive away probably about 70% of the population. Um,
Yeah.
and I'll think, well, what's wrong with them? And then what I do is I go and find someone just like me and I say, Blaine, like, what's wrong with them? And they're
Yeah.
like, I know, I have the same problem. You're like, yeah, so it can't be us. We're good people. Now, what I could do is I could go to somebody I know well who probably sees the world differently. Like, so for me, I'm a red yellow, so I would need to go talk to a green blue,
Mm-hmm.
and that person doesn't need a manual or an assessment, or they go, well, Andrew, it's you. And I'm like, no, it's not me. I want to go back and talk to Blaine because Blaine understands what's happening. You don't understand. Well, actually, they do, but they're pointing the finger back at the leader.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what you need to change. And people think this takes a long time. It actually doesn't. It
Oh,
actually doesn't take very long at all. It's just small differences in behavior and recognizing early on that I've lost the person.
spot on. Yep. Yeah. And I like that point about small changes. It's not huge. I mean, I don't have
Mm-mm.
to upend
Yeah.
the whole, throw the baby out with the bath, so to speak. A small change, yeah, can work miracles. I mean, I'm reminded of Buckminster Fuller. Call me Trim Tab. Yeah. Somebody said, "What should I call you?" Call me Trim Tab. And you're an engineer. The Trim Tab, that
Mhm.
little small control surface, that when you get the airplane or the boat set up, you set the Trim Tab up, and it stabilizes. You don't have big pushes and pulls on the
That's right.
control. Yeah,
Great analogy. Yeah. You know,
and
the challenge we get into is we do the big pulls.
yeah,
When I was young, I got my private pilot's license, and I'm up in the air. When you're learning to fly, you're doing this, and
oh
when
yeah,
you do this, you got to do this to compensate. And my instructor is like, slow down. When you jerk the organization around like that,
yep,
you confuse people, and they don't know what they're like. If you go and ask, and this is one of the great things about bringing someone externally into your organization, because if you go ask people questions, they don't necessarily answer completely truthfully.
hmm
But when an external party comes in and says, what are your priorities? The inevitable answer is it depends on the day. Like, they
yeah,
feel jerked around and they don't understand the bigger picture. And then we say they don't see the big picture. Well, whose fault's that? That's of course our fault, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And the interesting thing about just physiologically being jerked around like that, when basically I'm off balance,
yes.
and any organism that is off balance, the only move that they've got is a safety oriented move, which generally is an overcompensation in the
Yes.
other direction. And so it looks like resistance. It's not resistance. It's just somebody trying to get back to a state of stasis, some
Yep.
equilibrium here.
Yeah.
And that oscillation,
Yeah.
trim tab,
Tim
small
Tam. Yeah.
things.
I
Boom.
love that.
Yeah,
Yeah. You mind if I use that? I love that idea. I haven't
absolutely.
thought
Run
about
with it.
that before. That's a great analogy. It really is.
Okay. Folks, Andrew Oxley. Andrew, where can folks find out more about not only you, but also the Oxley organization?
Yeah, so we work typically with all manner of organizations. You mentioned we've worked some big companies like Progressive and Coca-Cola, but really our target market is probably in the 20 million to $250 million range of organization now, primarily because I love working with entrepreneurs and
Yeah,
founders. So if you go to transformingresults.com, that's transformingresults.com, you're going to see lots of free information there. We have a 90-minute live workshop you can join to be part of. We also have a book on Amazon. You mentioned it, The 4 Faces of Frustration, and that is available on Amazon. Feel free to get that. That is just one model we use when we're working with leaders, because models should explain things and make them simpler. So if you like that, it's written as a fable, not
hmm
a business book. I got really bored reading business books, so I wrote a fable because you can read it in about 2 or 3 hours, and the lesson is embedded within it. The model is embedded within it, and you see how you can apply it, and you see the methodology of how you would use it with your team. So it's super helpful in terms of improving your relationships with people, both at home and at work.
perfect. Folks, Andrew Oxley, founder of the Oxley Group, leadership consultant and coach extraordinaire. Thank you for taking the time here. I've loved this conversation. And
Well, thank you for having me, Blaine. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely. And folks, again, I'm going to close off with the admonition that I close off with all the time. There's nothing in nature that serves as a center of accumulation solely. Everything in nature at some point in time, particularly a thriving natural environment, serves as centers of distribution, not as centers of accumulation. So find something in your life to give away. Serve as a center of distribution. You're part of nature, so act like it. That would be the way that you actually set yourself up for success. Until
Absolutely.
next time, thanks for listening to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.